So we are still at the Sound Education. 3, 2, 1, go.
Hello and welcome to Lexitecture, a podcast about word origins and histories. My name is Ryan, and in each episode my friend Amy and I present a new word to each other and you, delving into its past, uncovering its secrets, and discovering that even the most basic, unassuming word can offer up precious truth nuggets of wordy trivia gold. If that sounds like the show for you, it probably is, so tell your friends and come along for the ride. Today's episode, sad.
We are still at the Sound Education Conference in Harvard. It is Friday afternoon, November 2nd. We have another special guest for this episode. We've got Mark Sundaram of the Endless Knot podcast, which if you haven't heard yet, you ought to, because it's great. And they talk about alcohol and words and history and myth and legend and culture, and they cram a lot of stuff, and YouTube.
You have all the good things going on.
So everybody wins at the Endless Knot, which is great. And Mark is going to graciously provide us with a word to talk about. So welcome, Mark. Thanks very much for coming
Thank you
along.
for having me.
So what have you got for us today?
I have the word sad.
Ooh. I'm oddly happy about that.
It sounds like such a simple word. You might think, oh, surely that couldn't have changed much. It has changed enormously over its history.
Oh, very cool. All right, let's hear it.
All right. So the thing is, sad originally meant sated. It's related to sated, full.
Okay.
Like you've had enough food, you're
Yeah.
satisfied.
Yeah.
It's
Which-
related to that.
Right now,
We
very
just
much
came from
describes
lunch, yeah.
all three of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Perfect.
So it goes all the way back to Old English. In fact, the Old English word was sad. It's pronounced exactly the same.
Huh.
And it indeed in Old English meant sated, full, having one's fill of, food, drink, or other. It can be used sort of metaphorically. You've had your fill of fighting, so you could use it in that sort
Okay.
of figurative sense as well.
Nice.
And in fact, that is the meaning that goes right back to Proto-Indo-European. I know you guys like a good slice of pie.
We love a slice of pie.
So the root is sa, and it means satisfied, or to satisfy.
Okay. This is a deep-rooted word. I like
Yeah.
this.
So I mean, it was quite stable in its semantic range for much of its history, and it's only until you get into basically the Middle English period that it starts to shift. So how do we get from full to unhappy? Well, it goes in stages. It had the meaning of sort of heavy or ponderous, like you'd eaten too much, like you might feel after, Christmas dinner or something, and you can't move.
Okay, yeah.
So it goes in that direction, and that could be both physically or it could be mentally sort of heavy, ponderous, and so that starts maybe showing the direction it goes.
Yeah.
So it then sort of shifted a little more and meant weary, tired.
Okay. You can see the connection there, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's certainly a Christmas afternoon feeling, if ever I
Yes.
heard.
And from there, by around the year 1300, we get the feeling unhappy.
It's
quite a journey.
It is. It's odd that, I mean, you'd think there's so many other words that are very practical in their origin and story. Like, practically speaking, there aren't many places and time periods where having had lots of food is an unhappy state of being.
Yeah.
And that feels like a weird transition to me.
It
like,
is. Yeah.
Well, in fact, it makes me wonder how much food was available. Because if I get what you're saying, eating a lot of food, generally speaking, is good. It makes one satisfied, full, and usually the connotation with that is full and happy. But you know what it's like to eat too much. It's pretty miserable. It's definitely not a happy state of affairs. And it makes me wonder if perhaps the opportunities for people to get really, really full were perhaps increasing at that time. So, I mean, God, there have been people full and people starving throughout any period of history you want to look at. But the fact that suddenly this becomes ponderous and difficult and something that will impact on your happiness makes me think that more and more opportunities to get really, really full must have been coming around. Yeah, that's kind of how it feels.
That's interesting. I remember reading, this is a weird, obscure cultural reference, I think.
Surely not.
I know, not for me. That's very bizarre. My aunt got me a book when I was younger, sort of early teen years, and it was an Irish... It was a book that was purportedly based in Irish legend and folklore and stuff. And one of the things, I don't remember much about the story, I don't remember much, but it's the weird little things that stick with you. And one of the things that stuck with me from this story is the protagonist. It was from a time period where everything was very warlike and savage. These were like the Celtic warriors in this clan. And one of the things that was really symbolic of a person who had become old and was sort of on his way out of the prime warrior status in this clan was the act of loosening your belt after a meal. If you had to adjust your clothes to accommodate your newfound girth, it was a sign. It was a bad sign. It was like that was a terrible thing to have to do, which is, I mean, it's apropos of almost nothing to do with what this is, but that's the thing that comes to mind, is this idea that if you have then
not good,
gone to a point where you're too full, if the opportunities to be full were more commonplace by that point, or if this word kind of started its shift in a place and at a time when just simply the priorities were different, and the being so full that you couldn't move was enough of a detriment that it was then, the priorities were different. The priority wasn't, maybe it wasn't you can be full anytime you want now, so it's a bad thing, but maybe it was like food is not scarce enough that eating at any and all cost is the important thing, but it's now part of your life where moderation has become a concept.
I think that's an interesting spin on, that there are so many quote unquote folk etymological ways to consider how this change has happened, and that we love those. But satisfaction, that's an interesting concept to talk about, and satisfaction through food. Yes and no. Does food really satisfy you? So yeah, this is fascinating.
Are you actually happier after stress eating, or do you just not pay as much attention to what's making you unhappy before?
Do donuts make you happy? Probably not.
And I suppose you could also look at it as being, greedy, and therefore, you ate too much out of, an excess of wanting to eat, and so it's a blight on your character or something.
I find myself wondering if there's a Proto-Indo-European root for the word greedy. I find myself wondering how old the word greedy is, because
it's an Old English word.
Sure. So the concept, I mean, I'm thinking of 7 deadly sins, so certainly pretty damn old. But the concept of taking more than your share.
Yeah, right.
I'm still kind of in this place of how much food is there to go around. Are people more likely to be greedy when there's a lot of food, or are they more likely to be greedy when there maybe isn't enough food? When is it the bigger sin?
Or is greedy more understandable when there's not a lot of food?
Yeah,
so you don't
exactly.
necessarily fault people as much for that level of it.
But then greed and satisfaction have got to be there. Yeah, they're.
But you have to go beyond. We're thinking of it in the concept of heavy, slow, encumbered, bloated, all these other. But to get to that point, you have to surpass sated.
Yes,
like
that's
you're
right.
Satisfied is 8. Bloated and full and can't move, and I'm so full I can see through time and can't stand is like 11.
Yeah.
So
you're
really,
not just satisfied, you're over satisfied.
Yeah.
Really, what we have in this word is a precise point in history at which the philosopher said, "I can't get no satisfaction," and therefore satisfaction can no longer be achieved. So if I can't have it, then it's bad.
As always, we all just listen to Nick.
Well, interestingly, this word has had a number of other senses over time. Most of them become obsolete now we just think of unhappy, but here are a few that I've picked out of the OED. It can mean settled, firmly established in purpose or condition, steadfast, firm, constant.
That's really interesting.
It has also meant strong, firm, standing fast, especially in battle, capable of resisting, valiant.
That is so bizarre that all of these are incredibly positive things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of looks or appearance, dignified, grave, serious. So, a sad-looking.
I don't, I
It's
don't
actually.
understand at all.
Yeah.
Or of a person orderly and regular in life, of trustworthy character and judgment, grave, serious. Also in extended use of a person's behavior or judgment, grave or serious. Of a period of time. So, and apparently that sense is not completely obsolete, but still occurs in some dialects. So Caribbean English and apparently Scottish English. So can you confirm or disconfirm this?
To talk about a sad period of time?
Yeah. Of a person's behavior or age, so a sad time in their life, I guess.
I don't think I've ever come
that's
across. That's
interesting.
really interesting. Yeah, I need to go hunting for that.
Beyond just the sort of superficial, like it's still keeping the unhappy. Like an unhappy time would be a sad time, but
I mean, we have many
One
different
that
shades of unhappiness in Scotland.
I went to Scotland in August for our anniversary and had to buy a sweater because the weather turned decidedly Scottish on me. That's
I'm
really
also thinking now that you're talking about weather of SAD, the acronym, seasonal affective
Oh,
disorder,
right,
SAD.
Right, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
which
right.
which only just occurred to me there, but
It's weird that this would, because we've seen a lot of examples of words that have sort of flipped in their meaning, usually in a pejorative sense.
yes.
Like you had things like nice, or words that come from the idea of
Right.
pity,
Yeah.
or
Silly, that was
misfortune.
another one.
Silly was one that we did, yeah, and how it starts out with just a qualitatively neutral assessment, and then gets applied in a way, basically just ways for people to be mean to each other. And this seems to have done that, but without necessarily the pejorative side of it. Like this seems to have gone from, and swung even harder from, these things that are really satisfied, sated, strong, resolved, firm, steadfast, valiant, noble, beautiful. Like sad, meaning those, is just so foreign.
Yeah.
I think what I like about this is that these are all complex characteristics.
They are. Yeah.
And, so I'm a yoga teacher and I read self-help books and I am part of that whole self-love affair. And my God, do I get sick of people telling other people to be happy and positive, because that is not the human experience. And it's like spiritual gaslighting. Let's all be happy all the time about
Right,
everything.
yeah.
No, that's stupid. And so these are all complex states. Someone who is steadfast, what's underneath that? There's lots of different things that could be underneath it. Not necessarily things which are negative, but things which are perhaps difficult for the casual observer to understand at first glance. Maybe it just became easier to say, oh, that person who never complains about anything, who always seems to have their stuff together and is perhaps a little bit closed off to other people in that sense, maybe they're unhappy. Maybe that's what that's about. Or the notion of even things like, applying it to the way a person looks. That's super interesting. Yeah.
Well, two of my favorite obsolete senses are profoundly or solidly learned in something. So you could be
Fantastic.
sad in etymology, I guess.
Oh, nice.
Or unmistakable, certain, true, genuine. So you could have, I guess, a sad etymology. It's a genuine.
When you actually know a thing, that is fascinating.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever come across a word that seems to have had such a stark, just a 180 turnaround.
What a
and one that I
shapeshifter.
would
Yeah.
more like
Yeah.
to have actual access to the thought and the actual process, which would of course have probably taken decades or centuries.
What I keep
to
thinking
complete in
of
various
is,
places, but boy, that's interesting.
people like to say that language is always being dumbed down. Everybody likes to talk about the dumbing down, and I remember sending you a passage from John McWhorter's book, The Power of Babel, which references a text from the point at which Latin was turning into French, where this particular writer was bemoaning exactly the same thing in the whatever century it was. So it seems that this trend has been around for a long time. And one of the things that this particular word makes me think of is emojis. So emotions are reduced from complex, nuanced, interesting states that occur as a result of various different influences and external situations. And now it's a colon and a parenthesis bracket facing in a particular way.
Yeah.
And I feel as though I want to champion the many different uses of the word sad. I feel like I want its complexity back, rather than just giving it an upside down smiley face. Yeah.
What I'm guessing probably happened here is, it started out with this very literal sense of satisfied, and then they just sort of experimented with all these different, figurative senses branching off from that. And it's sort of like evolution. A bunch of them die out, and the unhappy one is the one that's left.
It's the one that's stuck.
Oh, I don't want that to be the end.
Well, to raise our spirits and leave us less sad, so I've started off with a very lexitecture, look at how this word has all these little aspects and have changed over time.
Right.
Now I'm going to take us on a little endless knot interconnected trip here.
Beautiful. I like these.
So let's look at some of the cognates with sad from that same sa Proto-Indo-European root. It goes into Latin as satis, meaning enough. And if you put that together with facere, to make, you get satisfy. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. It also turns into the word assets.
Oh,
that's interesting.
So again, you combine that Latin satis with the prefix ad, meaning to. So basically, it gets the idea of sufficiency, satisfaction, compensation, and that goes into Anglo-Norman French, assets or assez in modern French, and has this. It takes on this legal sense in Anglo-Norman law, referring to having enough wealth to satisfy or settle the claims made against a deceased person's estate.
Oh,
so
interesting.
it continues to have that sense of enough.
Yeah. But the interesting thing that happened here is that the word was assets. It was taken as a plural. It was actually a singular noun. And the S or Z at the end was removed, and that's how we get asset as a singular.
Okay.
But the original usage of it was you would have an assets column in a balance sheet.
Right.
And so that singular noun was reinterpreted as a plural, and that's how we get asset.
Oh, that's interesting. It's weird to have a singular S ending, so I can see why people.
Yeah,
would
I mean, it works in French, but in English, it's unusual. But there's an even stranger cognate word.
Do tell.
Again, this happens through Latin. So that root also becomes satur in Latin, which means, again, sated or full in that sort of original sense.
Oh my God.
And then it's used in the phrase lanx satura, literally a full dish. So a lanx is a dish, a plate or something like that. And so therefore it's used to refer to a mixed dish, a dish filled with various kinds of fruit or different kinds of food. And it then becomes used figuratively in the word satira, meaning a poetic medley. So it's like a poetic, mixed bowl of food.
I have to stop you for a moment and explain why we are so very delighted. So this morning we recorded an episode with Kevin Stroud of the History of English, and the conversation got to the relationship between satire and sausage. And this is, and I said, I recall hearing this at some point as an undergraduate studying satire, introduction to classics. I forget what the actual etymological link is. here you are to fulfill exactly
rescue.
that function. Thank you so much.
Well,
Tell
there
us
you
more.
go. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So it originally referred to a poetic form of, having mixed meters and mixed forms and so forth. So a poetic collection of different types of things. In particular, the work of the Roman poet Ennius, who now only exists very fragmentary. He was pre-Virgil, and when Virgil became all the rage, all that older stuff got forgotten, and no one bothered to copy it down again.
Right, yeah.
So there's not much of Ennius left, but what we do know about him is that he had these kinds of mixed poetic collections. And from there, it gained the sense of a work intended to ridicule vice or folly. And that's how we get our modern sense of satire, probably through influence of a Greek word, satyr. The mythical animal,
Right,
the
okay.
goat man animal.
Yeah.
The mischievous trickster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there was a tradition in Greek drama of having the satyr play, which is a sort of, body raucous kind of, slapstick comic play, often very rude, as part of the,
Shockingly.
their
Like people
dramatic.
who don't know Greek, they think drama from antiquity. They're like, whatever, it's stuffy. And what am I reading?
I remember thinking exactly the same thing about Chaucer, going
Yeah.
to a module on Middle English literature, and coming from the Scottish education system. Chaucer is a text that's often studied within the A-level, the English system, and I had never read Chaucer before, and I was terribly worried that everyone else would have a leg up on me and this super serious, and I started reading Chaucer, and first of all I realised that I understood it much better if I read it aloud, because a lot of Middle English sounds quite Scots,
Yeah.
interestingly, and secondly I got a few pages in and said, this is essentially a medieval carry-on film. What's going on? So
Yeah.
satyr plays
Satyr
and
plays and stuff, yeah.
So influence through the satyr play, it then takes on this sense of, mocking kind of poetry, and so satire.
Oh man.
so the sausage connection is about the stuffing mixture of things.
Yeah, exactly. And for a little coda,
Yeah.
another cognate that comes through Greek, it becomes the Greek word hadros, which again, it has, pretty reasonably closely related sense of meaning thick, strong, large, so it's satisfied in that sort of sense. And that word was used to coin a couple of, scientific terms. So a hadrosaur,
Okay.
who is a, big, large, thick dinosaur, but also a hadron or hadron, the particle
Oh, that's fantastic.
of the Large Hadron Collider, because it's a massive particle. So
Yeah. Oh man.
now you may think I'm pulling a quick one here, because how do you get from sa to ha?
Yeah.
That seems a little odd, but this is actually a very regular sound change from Proto-Indo-European into Greek,
Okay.
where initial SA becomes HA. In fact, initial S becomes an initial H. Doesn't happen in other positions, but when it's at the first letter of the word, that is a regular change. We see the same thing with the word seven. Right?
Yes. I was
Seven,
just thinking this.
Set in French, or septum in Latin, corresponds to hepta in Greek. So like a heptagon is a
course it
seven-sided
does.
sign.
Yeah.
Oh man.
So whenever you see a weird discrepancy like that, where the Greek has an H, whereas everyone else has an S, that's a particular sound change that happened in Greek.
I'm so
amazing.
happy right now. Sappy, happy.
Sappy, yeah.
However that
Whatever it
goes.
is. That's fantastic.
So
I-
that took us on kind of a journey.
Absolutely. Man, that was
Those are-
fantastic.
That's amazing. I love
Sad.
that. I'm sad.
I
No.
feel like this
I think
this
we should resurrect that.
yeah this whole thing has been like, so I love Scrabble. My husband and I like to play Scrabble, and my husband is a maths teacher, and I was an English teacher, and language is my thing. So I should be better at Scrabble than him.
I know the feeling.
However, truth be told, he regularly beats me at Scrabble. And the reason for that generally is because I want to make cool words
Yeah.
whereas he actually understands and espouses the point of the game, which is to make as many points as you can.
Yes. Yes.
And sad feels like one of these words where, you know, where I've patiently curated my letters over 4 or 5 turns to make this really, really chunky, slightly out there, brilliant word. And he lays down 2 tiles and scores 52 points.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's really a game about numbers.
I know.
It is.
It really is.
Straight addition.
You don't have to know what the word
Described.
means. It doesn't really matter. If it's,
Yeah.
If it fits, it fits.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for bringing us on that trip. That's actually one of my favorite things about the Endless Knot podcast is those. It feels like a roller coaster. Like it feels like you're listening to this, and it's just this whirlwind. Sort of the moment in like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory where everything's going by and just zipping past. You're getting these little like nuggets of awesome as it's flying by, and you end up at the end and you sort of like have to hang on to the sides of the seat as you're kind of swaying, going, "Whoa!" Or like a Neo
What
in the
just happened
Matrix
to my
thing.
head?
And
how
so
did we
those-
get to here from there? I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
So those are fantastic. So yeah, that was amazing. Thank you so much for coming out and
My pleasure.
doing that. And yeah, check out The Endless Knot on Twitter and YouTube. And you guys are on Facebook? Yes?
Yes, we are on
Yeah.
Facebook and
So,
Twitter and
Find them in all kinds of places
Instagram
and
everywhere.
listen and watch because it's awesome.
All the places to look.
Thanks very much, Mark.
Thank you.
That's it for another episode of Lexitecture. If you like what you've heard, please spread the words. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook by searching Lexitecture, Lexitecture, and find us on our website at lexitecture.com. We also love hearing from you, so if you've got a word you'd like us to look into, a tasty bit of trivia to share, or anything else you'd like to tell us, drop us a line at words@lexitecture.com. Talk to you next time. Bye.